So I did some auditing for the Queensland Auditor General via the Queensland Water Commission back then when they had one. And there was an argument about, well, why would you have water efficiency and rainwater harvesting? It doesn't seem to be a lot of benefit. The graph I'm showing now are average results for sure, but this is from real data. We live in a world where people say a lot of things, and in the rainwater harvesting industry and the sustainability industry, there's always a lot said about what works and what doesn't, but in data I trust. So here's some data. On the one side here is houses with no rainwater harvesting or water efficient appliances. It's their water use patterns. And this is 18 months monitoring of the water use events and the flow rates for each water use event. So number of events versus flow rate. On the other side is houses with rainwater harvesting and water efficient appliances. It's their water use patterns. And as you can see, the amount of water used per event. Now, an event in a household might be flushing the toilet or having a shower or watering the garden. That's a water use event. Washing the dishes, I try and avoid that. But anyway, what's happening here is water demanded from households in Queensland, as we actually measured it for households without rainwater harvesting and water efficiency and those with rainwater harvesting and water efficiency. And as you can see, the shape of their water use is dramatically different. So when that part of the water use that's used for indoor use is regularly drawing down your rainwater harvesting storage, your rainwater tank, leaving space available for the next time it rains so that you're also managing your stormwater runoff. So these graphs are about water use, but to have a stormwater benefit from a rainwater tank, you must use the water. And if you use the water for indoor uses, you've got a guaranteed stormwater benefit. Like a constant indoor use like a toilet, provided your system's working properly, produces, in combination with other uses that actually draw down your rainwater storage, actually creates quite beneficial outcomes for stormwater. So in an urban area where your rainwater harvesting system is backed up by mains water from your utility, say a Brisbane Water or a Melbourne Water, the best rainwater harvesting system is one that empties often. It's the opposite to thinking about rural areas. So if you draw down your system often, it means it'll be available to fill up more often and have storage available to manage stormwater more often. So that's how you maximise your benefit. So the design of rainwater harvesting in an urban area with backup from a water supply is to not worry about keeping it full. You try and keep it empty by using the water for indoor uses as much as possible. Clearly not overuse the water, but realise the design is different. So to maximise your stormwater benefit, you actually need an indoor use. A few of them would be really good on top of your outdoor use. And you also need to ensure that you're emptying or drawing down your storage regularly. So constant indoor uses like toilet flushing are really good for stormwater management. This slide is about a house in the inner city of Richmond, which my colleague Chris Walsh, a scientist. So his house has 2 slimline rainwater tanks, about 5.5 kilolitres, 5,500 litres of rainwater storage. He supplies toilets and laundry. And importantly, his rainwater tanks overflow when they get full into his edible rain garden, his kitchen garden, and then flows to the street. So it's quite important because the rainwater harvesting is part of the other things you're doing on your property. Shouldn't be considered in isolation. He saves about 40,000 litres of rainwater supply each year, so he's not demanding that from mains water. And if we see the first graph, the grey, which is monthly runoff volumes from his property, the grey and the black bars are actually the total volume each month added up flowing from his property. But the grey part of those graphs each month is the volume of stormwater that's no longer flowing from his property into the street drainage system. And that's quite important because before there was an urban area in place in that area, the majority of stormwater would not have run off a natural environment. So what Chris is quite passionate about is trying to reduce the runoff from properties down to what nature expects rather than all the excess water that urban areas generate. As you can show there with the black bars in the graph versus the grey, his house has dramatically changed the runoff. If we go over to the other graph, it's the runoff days per month, and that's an assessment measure that many people use to assess environmental performance. And as you can see, he's reduced runoff days considerably for part of the year and noticeably for the other part of the year. So his house is saving water, saving impacts on the council infrastructure that's protecting people from flooding and nuisance and property damage, and he's also protecting his local waterway in Port Phillip Bay.
Peter, that also doesn't take into account what actually happens in his garden as well, because that's only recording what's gone out of his house.
And that's a very important issue because this rainwater overflows into his garden and uses his kitchen garden, and something like 40% of his kitchen food demands are now supplied from his kitchen garden. So it's actually produced this extra benefit. And if you take that further, Mike, he's also using that to create shading in his property to mitigate the heat island effect, because he lives in an inner city area which is all concrete. So he's actually getting reduced heat island effect, the rainwater supplying the vegetation to keep the shade canopy in place, and also supplying his kitchen garden, which is offset some of his food miles. And so there's a number of benefits of considering the household rainwater system.